to New York. Benjamin Netanyahu speaking in the past hour or so at the UN General Assembly. All eyes on this speech, given what rests on the next few hours and days. Have been speaking about Israel. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah closer than ever to an all-out war. Israeli military chiefs telling troops this week to prepare for a ground offensive. By Wednesday evening, France and the UN prepared an urgent plan for a 21-day ceasefire to try to avoid escalation, re-establish a path to peace. Now, one that the UN, the EU, 10 Arab states signed. This morning there was some confusion. The State Department had briefed reporters that the Israeli Prime Minister had given assent to his truce, to the truce idea, but he was telling reporters that Hezbollah would be met with full force. So this is what happened as Benjamin Netanyahu took to the stage in the last few hours at the UN General Assembly.
In order. Order, please.
So what we're seeing, several diplomats walking out of the speech as it began, including the Saudi delegation. Cheers to. And Benjamin Netanyahu began by saying he didn't originally want to come to New York. He said he was doing it to tackle what he called, quote, slander, lies spoken by world leaders about him. This is him saying he's setting the record straight.
Good is portrayed as evil, and evil is portrayed as good. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of genocide when we defend ourselves. It's not about Gaza. It's about Israel. It's always been about Israel's very existence. And I say to you, until the Jewish state is treated like other nations, until this anti-Semitic swamp is drained, the UN will be viewed by fair-minded people everywhere as nothing more than a contemptuous farce.
OK, terminology that we've kind of heard with Donald Trump in the past, talking about draining the swamp, this time the swamp at the UN. Now, after taking aim at the UN, Benjamin Netanyahu spoke of last year's October the 7th attacks. He said it was reminiscent of the Holocaust, vowed again to bring back the hostages from Gaza, and said enough was enough with Hezbollah, that it was time for Israeli citizens to return to border towns, end the shelling. Now, the main vent of his anger was left for Iran, warning Tehran there was no place Israel couldn't reach. He told the room Israel was winning.
There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning.
Let's go to New York. Let's bring in our correspondent, Jessica Le Masurier. Jessica, great to have you on the programme. Tell me what your takeaway was from this speech.
Well, Netanyahu sounded angry, bellicose and defiant, and he did not sound like somebody who wants to pursue diplomacy, but rather someone who wants to send more bombs. He kept making reference to the fact that he was on a holy mission and that he won't stop until it's completed. He had brought some of the family members of hostages being held in Gaza, and they applauded at several moments throughout his speech. He promised that he would return their loved ones and complete the mission he is on, so that families who have had to leave the north of Israel can also go back to their homes. He said he had a warning for Iran in particular, that there is nowhere in the Middle East that Israeli missiles cannot reach. And he said, well, we're winning. And he portrayed this war, this battle, as a fight between good and evil, in which Israel are the good guys. He really talked about the forces of light and darkness, and talked about how, in his mind, the way things are being perceived from the UN are topsy-turvy. He took aim at the UN, criticising it for criticising Israel and saying that they've got it all wrong, because the fact of the matter is that most member states here at the UN think that the way Israel is behaving is in violation of international law and is entirely wrong. Major powers have been pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza for months now. That still hasn't happened. They're pushing for a ceasefire in Lebanon, but it appears that Netanyahu is ignoring that and that he is pushing on. He held up these two maps. He loves to bring props every time he comes here to the UN when he's up on his stage there in the General Assembly Hall. And he had these two props, two maps, and they represented his vision for a future Middle East, a Middle East in which Israel has its way and the sort of bad guys Middle East. And he called them the cursed map and the blessing map. And he talked about, well, if Israel has its way and it forges partnerships, then we can turn the Middle East into this juggernaut of trade and tourism. But if you let the bad guys win, then it's going to be doom and gloom. And so he gave, this really aggressive, powerful, and at times, as you mentioned, Trumpian-sounding speech, even making a reference saying, well, something like, would you accept, making reference to the towns in the north of Israel that have now become ghost towns since people have evacuated out of fear of getting bombed by Hezbollah. He said, well, would you accept that happening in El Paso or in San Diego? So sounding quite Trumpian there.
Yeah, Jessica, stay with us. I want to bring in Rawad Taha in Beirut at the same time that you're on with us here from New York, because Rawad, it's very good to have you on the programme. Just give us an idea of what you're experiencing there in Beirut tonight.
Roughly around 20 minutes ago, I was in Beirut and we heard the loudest explosions that we've ever witnessed in the capital since the start of the conflict this week and over the past year since the start of this war of attrition. Now, what we know for a fact is that Israel has attacked Beirut's southern suburb, and an entire neighborhood in Beirut's southern suburb has completely collapsed. The entire neighborhood was carpet bombed by Israel with an initial estimate of at least 10 rockets. Also, preliminary information suggests that these were 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs. What we're hearing from Israeli media is that possibly the target of the assassination was Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and that was attacked was Hezbollah's headquarters located underground below those at least six residential buildings. Still no confirmation whatsoever of what's going on here in Beirut. However, it is estimated that the death toll from this carpet bombing of this residential neighborhood is going to be potentially very, very high, and whether really Nasrallah and the rest of Hezbollah's command structure was under those buildings is something that we don't know up until this moment. All I can say is tense moments ahead and a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, so we're talking about, as we're watching these live images from Beirut, you can see smoke rising from the capital as well. You're talking about an area being, you say, pretty much wiped off the map, razed from the suburbs. What we're hearing from the Israeli military in the past few minutes, this is a spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, saying this, the HQ of Hezbollah, he said, which is in Dahia area, where you're talking about in the south of Beirut, Rawad, saying that, quote, it was intentionally built under residential buildings. He goes on to say, as part of Hezbollah's strategy of using Lebanese people as human shield, Israel is doing everything it can, what every sovereign state would do, he says, if they had a terrorist organisation seeking to destroy them on the border, taking necessary action to protect our people and Israeli families. So they call it a precision strike, but what you're hearing is a huge amount of devastation, Rawad.
There's an entire neighborhood in Beirut's southern suburb that was completely wiped out, at least 6 buildings. We still don't know if these buildings were evacuated beforehand or not, but probably not, because we haven't witnessed any mass evacuations out of Beirut's southern suburbs, unlike the evacuations we saw in the south. This is unfolding to be some sort of a catastrophe in terms of the number of casualties involved in this attack. Regarding whether Hezbollah's headquarters is really under those buildings or not, this is something that I cannot confirm, and no security official in Lebanon has confirmed that just yet. And regarding whether this assassination was successful is also something that we are not aware of, but definitely from the preliminary information, this is a mass casualty event in Beirut's southern suburbs.
As we're talking, Rawad, there's an AP journalist who's just filed this, an eyewitness is saying that there were multiple strikes taking place about 700 to 800 metres from a school where displaced people from the south of Lebanon have been taking refuge. So to the south, to Beirut, by the school. Quote, at the beginning, everyone, including the reporting team, thought it was a strong sonic boom as a result of Israeli jets. Then the sound of explosions continued round after round for about 90 seconds. People rushed out the building, women and children screaming and crying. The reporter says he saw people faint, falling on the ground. The man in charge of civil defence there was trying to calm people down, saying there were only sonic booms. But as soon as they saw what we've seen as well tonight, these live images, smoke coming from the area behind the buildings, and as you say, these what appears to be the razing of a huge area. Now, Rawad, how far were you from where these strikes were taking place?
Currently, I'm in downtown Beirut, so I'm roughly around 4 kilometers away from the location of the strikes, more or less, roughly around 4 or 5 kilometers. And even here in the building in which I was in, the entire building shook. The sound of the series of explosions, roughly around 8 or 9 explosions back to back, was something that we've never heard, at least recently in Beirut. It was not something that we heard. So over the past week, we saw that there was a number of assassinations that were conducted in Beirut's southern suburbs, but they were conducted using probably precision missiles or targeting certain floors of apartment buildings. Yeah. And back then, we didn't even hear the sound of explosions in Beirut, which is only 4 kilometers away from its suburbs, from Dahi. But yeah, the sound of those 10 attacks, the sound was immense. Like initially, we realized that I first looked at the window and I imagined that this cannot be 4 kilometers away. My initial estimate was this is somewhere around the corner of the street, but then we realized that no, this is in Beirut's southern suburbs. But the scale of the attack was too huge, and the bombs used were too huge. Some are already talking that they are 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs. So the entire city shook altogether.